Now, as mentioned earlier, we have a special guest in the studio with us here today. We are joined by Dr. Stephen Linton, the founder and chairman of the Eugene Bell Foundation, a Korean and US charity that provides medical humanitarian assistance to North Korea. The foundation was established in 1995 at the height of the famine that killed millions. It originally provided food aid to the regime, but has since been providing medical aid specifically for tuberculosis. Some 250,000 patients have been treated over the years and is now currently tackling drug-resistant tuberculosis. However, despite the charity's efforts, there are still over 100,000 infected with the disease and thousands die every year. Dr. Linton's ties with North Korea have led to him visiting more than 80 times over the last 40 years. He was last in North Korea in May, continuing to try and provide aid to the North Korean people. Dr. Linton, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for your invitation.
As I mentioned, you last visited North Korea just last month this year. Can you tell us about the trip, and with it, can you explain what the Eugene Bell Foundation does in North Korea?
Well, we usually go twice a year. We have a multi-drug resistant TB program in 12 separate centers on the West Coast. And we visit every center and we meet with every patient. We discharge patients who've completed the program and enroll new patients every time. So this is an ongoing thing. Our shipments of medication are timed so that they get there before our trips, and we deliver the medication to the centers that we support.
As I mentioned, you visited North Korea dozens of times, but the timing of this visit has caught my attention here, because it was just after the Inter-Korean Summit in April and just before the US Summit in June. Was there anything different that you felt this time when you went? Were North Koreans aware of the summits, and what was their reaction to it?
They're definitely aware of it. You have to say that probably the division of Korea has incurred more suffering on North Koreans than anyone else. They've paid the highest price for the tragedy of Korea, and therefore, understandably, they're very hopeful that a better future lies ahead for them. Cautiously hopeful is the attitude today, I think. Would be best sum it up.
You've been there before when they had previous Inter-Korean summits as well. And was there the same kind of hope back then as it is now?
Oh no, this is different, because this time the US is on board. I think that in previous years the US has not been on board, and so I think North Koreans consider a better relationship with the US to be key to a better future, and therefore there's a lot more hope this time.
Let's talk about the humanitarian issue, the situation in North Korea right now. There were unconfirmed reports that one of the first things North Korea asked for in exchange for denuclearization was medical aid in their negotiations with the US. Do you believe that? I mean, how bad is the health situation in North Korea right now?
Well, it's been a challenge. Health has been a challenge for a long time. But I would be surprised if they had asked for medical aid first, because in a normal context, in these situations, the request is for economic activity. And you see reports of discussions about trains and roads and that sort of thing. So one of the challenges and one of the concerns that I have at a time when North-South relations are moving forward with the concurrence of the U.S. is that, in fact, humanitarian concerns could be left behind for all those other issues that people are usually much more interested in.
The Eugene Bell Foundation is trying to tackle the tuberculosis epidemic in North Korea and has been doing so for over 20 years now. How urgent is the situation with tuberculosis, and what are some of the biggest challenges?
Well, tuberculosis is North Korea's number 1, 2, and 3 biggest health challenge. I think it far outstrips any other disease, and arguably even concerns for malnutrition, because it's an airborne infection. And it can go dormant and become active decades after someone actually contracts it. So there's no question about it being the most concern from a health standpoint. The program that has been in place as of 2018 was not adequate. Because there's no vaccination, the only way to deal with tuberculosis is to treat all the patients. And despite the fact that the Global Fund was treating all regular TB patients, not all of North Korean TB patients were being treated because there is an estimated about 8,000 people who are infected with mutant TB every year. We have been treating about 15% of those people. The Global Fund had a program that treated about 5%. So up until this year, 100% of registered regular TB patients, about 130,000 people, were covered by the Global Fund. 5% of MDR patients were covered by the Global Fund, and 15% of them were covered by us. But there's a huge gap there. There's a gap of 80% who were not covered. And if you don't treat these people, the numbers of MDR patients just increases. So this is much worse than Ebola. I think if it were Ebola, people would be much more excited about it. But actually, because it's TB and because it kills people slower, it has never received the sort of attention that it deserves.
So Eugene Bell has been trying to tackle the mutated, the drug-resistant type of TB for the last few years. As you talked about the Global Fund before, but can you explain before how you used to treat regular TB, but now you're treating drug-resistant TB, and why that's important?
Well, regular TB requires 4 different medications. It's a 6 to 8 month course. There are very few side effects, and the cure rate is about 90–95%. And the drugs only cost about $20 to $30 per course. Multi-drug resistant TB drugs cost 100 times as much. The cure rate worldwide is only about a little less than 50%, and it requires 18 to 24 months of treatment with horrendous side effects. So a lot of people call multi-drug resistant TB contagious cancer. Up until this year, because the Global Fund came in 2008 and took over regular TB, we've had the capacity to then focus on multi-drug resistant TB, where we enroll about 1,000 to 1,200 people a year. The problem is that the Global Fund has now withdrawn from North Korea. So all of a sudden, all of the 130,000 odd regular TB patients, plus the 5% of the multi-drug resistant patients covered by the Global Fund, will no longer be supported next year. So this really is a catastrophe.
How much does North Korea need help from outside, like humanitarian, like organizations like yourself? What is the medical situation, the healthcare system in North Korea like?
They have a universal healthcare system, but because of the stressed economic situation, the availability of expendables, the availability of medical equipment, the availability of regular medicines is very low. So you can go to the hospital, you have a right to do that, and you can see a doctor, and you can get a prescription, but you can't always guarantee that that hospital will have medication to actually treat the problem that you've gone to the hospital to take care of. So it's a serious situation.
So I guess we do need help. We do need to help them with these kind of organizations to tackle this kind of epidemic.
This is not the time to withdraw from North Korea. And I understand that there were political considerations in the Global Fund's decision as well as other. But unfortunately, they made that decision before the recent thaw in relations, which is very unfortunate.
I mean, that's right, because international economic sanctions placed on North Korea, technically they shouldn't be involve food and humanitarian aid and medical aid, but a lot of these kind of international organizations, they also do get influence politically.
Yes.
I mean, why is that?
There's a certain amount of institutional liability. In other words, while they know there's a need, and while they may be reasonably satisfied with the program they have in North Korea, they're very concerned about things like sanctions against their bank accounts should they run afoul of one of the sanctions regimens. The latest sanctions, for instance, prohibits metal, and a lot of states have interpreted that to mean anything that contains metal, so that even a metal glasses frame would not work, or metal chopsticks. So that the latest sanctions have thrown the whole, a whole series of normal, regular humanitarian-related items into question. And some organizations are just not willing to take that risk.
I mean, has it affected your organization?
Yes, we need to send, we need to have more our patients have to have inpatient care at a certain point. And so we had a very robust program for providing prefab, well-insulated patient treatment centers, manufactured in the outside in South Korea and shipped to North Korea. And we've been working on this program for a long time, and everything was all in place, and we had our pilot completed, and all of a sudden we found ourselves unable to ship them because the roofs have tin on them. Things, doorknobs are made of metal on the doors. So yeah, it has affected us. Gratefully, we can still send medications, but fundamentally it becomes very difficult to have a serious medical program without any metal parts.
But there are concerns from cynics, I would say, who would say that North Korean regime cannot be trusted to get the medical supplies to the people who desperately need them. What is your response to these concerns, and how has the foundation tackled these?
Well, I can only speak for our program. I'm not involved, but say you're a North Korean TB patient, and we think you may have multi-drug resistant TB. The way you get into our program is you meet with someone on our delegation and you give me a sputum sample. I test this in very high-tech medical equipment to decide whether you have TB and whether you have drug-resistant TB. It's a DNA, it's a machine that reads DNA. I can confirm that you have MDR-TB through a test that we do immediately. Every 6 months I come back and I get another sample from you, face to face. And if I run this through further analysis in a laboratory in South Korea, I can confirm whether or not the treatment is even working for you or not. So I know where you started, and every 6 months I can pick up a sample that will tell me pretty much how your treatment is going, all the way until the time that you're discharged from the programs. That level of transparency is hard to beat.
Checks and balances, and verifiable.
Yes.
One word that was missing from the nuclear deal recently.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure that I could do that legally in any other country.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it would be a violation of patient privacy. You would run into a lot of obstacles. I'm not sure that other governments would be very anxious about foreigners coming in and physically testing and treating their patients the way we do in North Korea.
Before we go, I mean, we've got a few minutes left. I just want to talk about your recent experiences. So the Eugene Bell Foundation works directly with the North Korea's regime's Ministry of Health. Have you noticed anything different, change over the years in dealing with the regime and over 3 generations of leaders, especially?
Well, I've been doing this for a long time, and so I think to boil it down, you can say this. Basically, an effective medical program is all about access. And certainly we have far better access today than we did when we began regular TB work in 1997. Over the years, our access has gotten better and better and better. And to that extent, the clarity of our program, I don't want to say transparency perhaps, but the clarity of our program has gotten better and better and better. North Koreans are obviously suspicious, particularly about people who come from countries that have a hostile policy toward them, or they believe have a hostile policy toward them. But if you demonstrate that you have no political interest, that you have no hostile intent, Koreans can be surprisingly open. And I think that's been our experience in North Korea. So that at this particular point, we could expand this program and physically enroll every MDR patient in North Korea if we had the resources to do it. And it's a crying shame we don't, because every year that we don't enroll them means the numbers of MDR patients go up.
aid to North Korea is, of course, not only a South Korea US issue, but an international one. And the whole world needs to get involved. If North Korea really does start to show its intent to denuclearize, how does the international community need to get together to act? And do we need to wait for them to show that they are denuclearization? I mean, this is perhaps one point that you might have an issue with as well.
Yeah, I really think that a humane society has certain givens that are never compromised for political purposes. And one of the things is that you treat people with infectious diseases. Whether you like them, hate them, it really doesn't matter. If they have a serious, life-threatening humanitarian issue that you can deal with in a transparent manner, making your treatment of that particular problem subject to some sort of political consideration on their part, I think is out of line. So there should be a dual-track system where basic humanitarian needs are met with regardless of the political or military tensions, or perhaps even in times of war. And I think that's where most of the humanitarian aid organizations got started. It was actually between combatants. Having said that, then what do you do about the economic side? The Koreans are pretty progressive people. And I think, just like South Korea, I think they would benefit more from opportunities than handouts. And so, other than basic humanitarian needs, I think a relaxation in the elimination of sanctions would do far more for the life of ordinary North Koreans than massive subsidies from the international community. And I think that's probably good news. But these people are determined to get ahead, just as South Koreans have been determined to get ahead for a long time. And it would be nice to see them get the opportunity.
Well, it's been a fascinating insight, and thank you for coming in and giving us, explaining to us everything that you're doing. And we wish you the best of luck.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks again for inviting me.